so special. I'm Stacey Wilson-Hunt, and allow me to bring all these wonderful people to the stage because it's a big, wonderful group. So let's start with writer-director Siân Heder. Actor Emilia Jones, who plays Ruby. Composer and co-songwriter Marius de Vries. Thank you. We practiced backstage for the pronunciation. He was very scary about it, so I hope I got it right. Co-songwriter Nick Baxter. Editor Jero Brisson. She plays Jackie, Marlee Matlin. He very memorably plays Frank, Troy Kotsur. And he plays Leo, Daniel Durant. And I also want to offer thanks to our amazing interpreters tonight, Jack, Justin, Gabe, and John. We really appreciate your services. Thank you so much. So normally with these conversations, I like to start with the writer and the director. But this time I'm going to mix it up a little bit because you've been talking about this movie for a long, long time. For about,
I love you for that.
I thought you might appreciate this. 10.5 months or so, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm actually going to start with the music masters, Marius and Nick. I rewatched the movie today, and what struck me in this second viewing was how important music is to the story. And also the word coda, which is a musical term for the end of a segment of a piece, which I think is very beautiful. How much did this overarching idea of endings and beginnings sort of inform the score and also the beautiful original song that you wrote, which is called Beyond the Beach, is that correct? Yes.
Beyond the Shore.
Excuse me, Beyond the Shore, thank you. I'd love to know the instrument inspiration that came to you. It's a lot of piano and strings, which is very beautiful. But also just what were you thinking and feeling when creating these beautiful songs and score?
In terms of beginnings and endings?
Yes, specifically on that theme.
That's a very good question.
Well, thank you. I know you're kind of hard to impress too, so that feels good.
I don't think we were aware of the coda thing, and in fact that was bigger in the script before we whittled it out. But it was more about music and silence than it was about beginnings and endings. And what is that relationship in this context? And what does the scene sound like which you would normally feel underscored, supported by music when there is no music? And what happens when you bleed music into that very gently and slowly? So yeah, I think that was the big calculation, was how to deal with the absence of music and then the arrival of music and how music could grow through the show to support the story.
And in composing the beautiful song that we hear in the credits, how much did the setting of the movie inform the sounds that we hear? It's a very distinct place in America, distinct people, distinct instrumentation that I heard. How much did that affect it?
I'll throw that to Nick because he grew up, at least part of his...
Are you asking in reference to the song?
Yes, in reference to the song.
Yeah, I think the song, we tried to tie back into some of the colors from the score, which is, it's organic, it's a lot of acoustic guitar and piano. So to tie that back in, and I would say the song sort of does serve as a coda. It's an extension of the narrative. It's the final piece of music that you hear. So in that sense, I think it makes sense to call it a coda. But yeah, my excitement with the song really was to explore, the more delicate, intimate sides of Emilia's voice. Because a lot of the movie, she's growing and finding her voice, finding strength, finding resonance. And during this section, it comes from a place of reflection, and it's more of an intimate track. So it was an opportunity to not only extend the narrative, but to explore some different parts of, reflective and mature parts of Emilia's voice, and I think it does that well.
And by the way, this young woman had no formal music training. Is this true? Could this possibly be?
No, I've never had a singing lesson before.
That is amazing.
Wow. But
Really.
then I found out I got the job there.
But
You started taking lessons.
And I had many, many lessons.
Such a beautiful voice. Thank you so much. And thank you, gentlemen, for writing such beautiful music. And when I heard it today, it made me think of traveling. It feels like traveling music. Like you'd get in your car and go somewhere listening to that score. I don't know what it is about it. It makes you feel like you want to go see something and explore something. So thank you for that. So Marlee and Troy, wow. What a performance from both of you. It's so much joy and so much fun. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you. How much rehearsal time did you have together before you started shooting?
3 weeks? Did we have 3 weeks? About 3 weeks. Around 3 weeks. One extra advantage we had is that we knew each other beforehand, and we knew each other's work. But we learned a great deal more about how we work during those 3 weeks of rehearsal. And we dove right into it. We really, really became our characters. Every time we rehearsed, we questioned each other, we improvised with each other, we took time reading the scenes and looking at the lines and discussing in depth, and it was fun, amazing fun.
It looked like it.
and I've been a big fan of Troy's for the longest time, and he was one of the items on my bucket list, and so now that item is in check now.
Thank you, that's very sweet. And Troy, obviously we all know Marlee's work for a long time, so incredible, so talented. For you coming into this project, you seem like you're having just a lot of fun and a lot of mischievous fun. And I'm wondering how much of what we see on screen is you? Is this kind of similar to what you're like in real life?
Yes and no. Yes and no. Really, when I first read the script, I saw there was a bit of dirty language, and I was extremely excited because that's more like the real me. Because I'm sick and tired of hearing people. There's so many hearing people out there that don't know anything about ASL having dirty language, and so now we were finally able to show our filthy side. Are you all ready?
And for me, really, that is the ultimate mark of inclusion.
Oh, and I
That is
also have to
amazing.
add, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Of course.
I have to add too that for those of you who have never seen his work before, Coda, he is, it's been a long time coming that he finally has his work recognized. He's paid his dues for a number of years in the theater world. So it's really about time that we finally got to see Troy on screen. And I know that we should be seeing a lot more. Thank you.
And Troy, you told me something backstage that was really surprising, is that this film almost got an R rating. Is that true? And tell me why that is, because I certainly understand some of the contextual, off-color jokes, but that seems absurd to me. Tell me about that.
All right, honey. All right, hearing people. We are tired of watching all of your hearing movies with your swear words and the subtitles, like the first letter being F and so on, and S as in shit, and so on. I've been used to it watching these films over the years, but where was our opportunity to show our culture and the dirtier sides of our language? And sure enough, they gave us an R rating at first because they were not used to seeing the roles reversed. And we were like, what? And we were fighting back and forth, and finally they reduced the rating to PG-13.
Was it really supposed to be rated R, Sean?
And I was like, man, where the fuck have you been?
I will jump in with it is true that ASL is a very blunt language, and there's, when you say the thing, it looks like the thing. And so there was kind of a cultural difference, honestly, in those conversations where you're like, when you sign these things, it's a visual medium, it's a visual language, and it's in your face. And I think it can be confronting for hearing people, honestly, because there's not as many sort of euphemisms or coy ways to say something. And so I think it was interesting that it's one of my favorite things about the language is it's very kind of visual and descriptive, and you get it. And I think that was a funny conversation to have with the MPA.
I love that. Hopefully many to come, right?
Yes.
Yep. But, you know, I really feel like complimented by it, actually.
Well, thank you both. You both did an amazing job. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And I laughed a lot. That's all that matters. So I wanted to talk to Emilia and Daniel. Emilia, first I want to congratulate you on being named Best Performer by the Hollywood Music and Media Awards just tonight. This just came out. You very much deserve it. And Daniel, where are you? There you are. You guys are far apart from each other. So I love, love, love your scenes together. And I love them because they feel so familiar to anyone who has a sibling. It doesn't have to be a male sibling, a hearing sibling, deaf sibling. Competitiveness, anger, someone feeling like they have to bear the brunt of the work in the family. This is all so familiar to all of us. So thank you for that. It feels so incredibly familiar. Emilia, I would love for you to tell me what you think hearing actors can learn from deaf performers and what you specifically learned, because it's so interesting now that I think about how much magic is brought to the screen when I get to see the whole face, the whole body, all of the hand movements. You start to think, oh, isn't this what they should all be doing all the time? It's such an interesting experiment. So tell me what you learned.
I learned so much working on this movie. I think I felt incredibly grateful to be able to portray my feelings through a different medium. It was a challenge because I think sometimes when you're acting, you can convey a lot through your eyes, and by not doing that much, you know, sometimes if a film goes to a theater, your eye is the size of a double-decker bus, so less is more. But with ASL, everything is so physical and so emotional. You know, if you're saying something small, you have to actually like show how small it is. And so it kind of, I guess, allowed me to get out of my head and embody what I was saying. And it was a challenge, but I felt like it made me more emotional. It made me connect with what I was saying more than when I'm just acting, not through ASL. Like the scene when I'm singing Both Sides Now, that the take that Sean actually used in the movie was a take that I messed up in because that scene was towards the end of shooting, and I'm so close with Marlee, Troy, and Daniel, and I didn't want it to end, and because I trained for 9 months learning sign language and singing, it had been such a big part of my life for so long. And I remember during the song, I looked up and I signed "I love you," and I saw Marlee, Troy, and Daniel, and I just got emotional, and I remember I forgot the melody and changed it, but it's actually the take that's in the movie. But it proved to me how much ASL makes you feel, and it really taught me the true meaning of communication, so I will be forever grateful for the experience.
That's amazing. You did such a wonderful job. Thank you. And Daniel, I hear that you and your on-screen sister took fishing very seriously, and maybe there's a little bit of competition that went into who became better at this skill, and specifically rope making. Tell me a little bit about this. I heard something about making a rope.
Well, during training days, when we were rehearsing, we were trying different things. We were learning how to do the fish, and they were teaching us how to tie rope. The fishermen have different kinds of knots. They have all different kinds of ropes. So they were showing me how to tie the knots, and I was like, okay, I can do that. And I started trying, and I struggled and struggled. It was hard. I didn't know how to do it. My hands weren't following what I was trying to say. And then Troy, he was like, come on. And I gave him the rope. You go ahead and try. You try. Troy was like, fine. He grabbed the rope. Wham. Got it. And I was like, what? I was furious. So fine. Troy's got it. Cool. And then I went over to the hotel, and I was struggling. And I plugged in the line. And I tied it to the chair. And I was practicing all night until the next day. We came back, and I was practicing again. And in that moment, when I was practicing that rope, I was thinking I was ready, and I went to tie it, and I made it. And I was so proud about that.
May I say something? Just to let you know, he still doesn't know how to tie his shoelaces.
Very impressive nonetheless. Thank you, Daniel. And Daniel, do you have a favorite scene from the movie? You have a lot of great moments, like very emotional but funny moments. The online dating scenes with the phone, very funny, again, very relatable. Do you have a favorite scene where you thought to yourself, I'm really proud of that?
My favorite scene is on the beach with Emilia, because, you know, my role as Leo, he was the older brother. He's the oldest kid in the family. And he's deaf, and I know I have a lot of ideas about things for the fishing business, but they kept depending on Emilia. And I missed it. So I told him straight up, straight to Ruby, you need to get away from our family. You can disconnect from us. We don't have to depend on you. In that scene is related with our deaf lives. Deaf people don't need help. Really, we're fine. We're acting, we're enjoying. Everything was fine. So it's related to this. We didn't need to depend on her. You can go. And she told me she could sing good. She could sing very well. And at that time, I realized I love my sister. And I'm happy for you, and I want what's best for her. So I told her, go, get away. Because I know what's best for her, and our family too. And that is my favorite scene.
That's so great. That's really the message of the movie, isn't it? That there's no tragedy here. This is just love. It's just family complication. It's just being alive, right?
Well, and I love that scene. That's my favorite scene probably too. I have a lot of favorite scenes in the movie, but I love that scene because I think Emilia and I talked a lot about, you know, Ruby's intentions and what she thinks she's doing versus what she's actually doing. And in a way, yes, she's facilitating communication. She's also serving as a barrier, you know, from this family really integrating with the community, because she's inserting herself everywhere. She's inserting herself at the auction house when she doesn't need to. And I think from talking to a lot of Codas, there's a mixed identity. You know, on one hand, yes, you feel like there's this incredible responsibility, and yet there's a huge sense of self-worth and importance and feeling in control at a young age, and you're sort of able to choose who gets what information. And so it was something that we really played with in this character, that she's flawed as well, and she doesn't see it as clearly as Leo can see it.
And also, how much of this has she put on herself, right? Did they ever expressly ask her, we expect you to be this person? So that's an interesting thing, how we fall into patterns in our families. My sister always says I'm too, you know, I always let my mom control me. Did I choose that? I don't know. It's just sort of a pattern that we fall into, and maybe it takes something like this to break you out of it, right? Where you say, oh, I have a passion. I have something I want to pursue. Again, very relatable, so thank you. And thank you, Daniel. That was a really lovely story. So I'd love to talk about the editing now. Editors, thank you so much for your work. You don't get enough attention, so thank you. It's a lonely job, I know. And Jero, you have spoken about how editing is often difficult to discuss because it's so personal and intuitive. The process isn't something that you can really say, well, step one, I do this, step two, I do that. What was distinctly challenging about cutting scenes in American Sign Language and intermingling them with scenes in English that we're more used to hearing as a hearing audience? And in what ways did your intuition serve you, but also not necessarily serve you in those moments?
Well, first of all, I would say that I'm not maybe as articulated as other editors to talk about the process. I'll try.
This man is very modest. I got the
He's
sense
so
backstage.
I had some experience before Coda, working on. I worked on a TV series before Coda called This Close, which is This Close was created by Shoshana Stern and George Feldman, and they wrote it. They were the lead in it. Marlee Matlin is in it, and they happen to be deaf. So that was my first experience and exposure, really, and very late in life, I have to admit, to the deaf culture, and to also working with downloading ASL. And I think that was just, you know, I can't say I learned all of it, but I just, at least, I think were at the place where I could ask myself the right questions when I was approaching it. I feel like the ASL itself I had help along the way. I had Sean. We can talk about it later. And then I had also Anne Tomasetti, who was the ASL master. And when they were giving me dailies, there was a translation along with the tracks. So, and it was separated from the rest of the audio tracks. So it was always there along. Eventually, after watching it 2 takes, I think you learn the dialogue. You know what they're saying. And that was not really the most challenging part in a way. What my worry was to approach it as an outsider and to miss things, to really not take out things that are part not just of the sign themselves, but also the physicality of the language. I love that they respond to vibration to get attention. I love that all this is part of language. And that was for me, I was the most anxious about that, like in a way. I felt like if I didn't know a sign, I would have help along the way. But there was plenty of people around me that would be happy to help me. I was on Google sometimes when they were in production. I never tell Sean that, but when they were in production and I was alone, I was by myself at that time, and I could tell when the dialogue was changing because after a few takes, I was able to decipher what meant what. But sometimes I knew they were improvising and changing the dialogue around, so I was sort of guessing and going on Google and just saying, okay, how do you sound this? And eventually getting it.
Well, you did an amazing job.
Sean had a good point because you need to have what's called deaf eyes, and he mentioned Anne Tomasetti, who was our sign language director. It's called a Dazzle or a sign language master, and they watched. And Sean could probably talk a little bit more at length about how that person helps in terms of having deaf eyes on the project.
Yeah, I mean, we made sure that we were running an audio track on set, so there was an interpreter running a track that was just for Giraud to turn on when he was in the edit. But again, yes, it was important to me to have deaf eyes every part of the process. So when I was writing the script, when we were on set, in the editing room, to be able to check takes, to check, everything. And then also it was interesting in terms of cutting rhythms because it was important to me that the signs be on screen, that my DP and I framed every shot so that you could see the language and we were never, which is interesting because a close-up is something that as a director you rely on in an intense moment, and it was important to me to keep hands in frame and keep the language in frame.
And I also wanted to just bring up something I read that was so obvious but fascinating. Keeping clothing minimal so you didn't have sleeves and fringe impeding on the hand movements, and also someone had mentioned that the couch was in the wrong position, it should be facing the door. All these incredible details that I clearly would have never thought of, but that's what made it feel so incredibly fresh.
And as Marlee said, that was that was like, as a hearing person, I'm always going to have a hearing gaze, and so it was important for me to have a team around me who was not just my actors on screen, but behind the camera as well. And then in the editing room, Giraud and I, you really are in the rhythm of the language because you are cutting, in a hearing dialogue scene, you might just stay on one actor the whole scene, and you're hearing lines off frame, and you're sort of making that editorial choice. But for us, it was really the rhythm of the language and the back and forth because we were cutting to the person who was talking to have the language on screen. So it was a very different rhythm, and I think it was interesting for us to discover that and how to find the pace within the language and find its own, let it live as, ASL in its truest form.
I'd love to chime in. So, I've had many friends all over the deaf community, and they've said, it's finally, we've never seen a conversational ASL scene on screen. It's been years and years. And, a lot of hearing people don't know how that interaction works. But with Coda, this is one of the first times where you've finally have been able to enjoy a complete ASL conversation. So thank you so much to our editor.
And I'd like to add that it was also the fact that there was captions throughout the entire film. It was open caption the entire film. That was important too.
And Sean, in closing, since you are the final, even though you've chimed in thus far, and thank you so much. First of all, again, thank you for telling this story. And mostly, thank you for telling the story like this that has no victims or tragedy. People just are. And I know it seems like a strange thing to bring out, but it's very rare. It's really incredibly rare. And I wanted to share this statistic, which is 1 in 4 Americans has a disability, and that includes deafness. And yet only 3.5% of series regular TV characters on television had a disability. That feels very off to me. So for anyone in this room who has the power to write stories, to direct, to greenlight, what is something everyone can do right now to just chip away at that really bad statistic in small ways, but also bigger ways? And what have you learned this year about how easy it actually is?
I mean, the statistic is crazy. I think in all of the diversity conversations that we're having now, disability seems to always come at the end, like an afterthought. You know, it's like, it's sort of the last thing that gets added to the list. And there's a lot of language still used around disability that would never be tolerated if you were talking about race, if you were talking about gender, if you were talking about sexuality. It's, you know, there's really still a lot of separate but equal language. It's like, well, you can't come to this, but we'll give you your own.
The Justice most recent Oscars was the first one ever to have a ramp.
Yes.
Again, that's staggering
And
information.
one of the things, you know, Jim Lebrecht has pointed this out, who was the director of one of the directors of Crib Camp, but he said, only putting the ramp there when there is a disabled person who is nominated, you're sending a really clear message that this space is not open to you always. And it's important, you know, Troy talks about seeing Marlee on screen when he was a teenager. And seeing her on screen, and it's, I'm not gonna speak for you, Troy, but you've said it before, like, it's the reason he's an actor, is he saw Marlee and was like, I could do that, and I could have a career and be an actor. And it's so important to have those, you know, representation that, you know, someone can look at the Oscar presentation and they can go, I could be there one day, even though I'm in a wheelchair, because that ramp is there and it's saying you're welcome in this space. So I think it's really important with interpreters, you know, and I've seen it a lot where, you know, an interpreter is trotted out just for Coda and then disappears, you know, for the rest of the movies or whatever else it is. And it's sort of, it's sending a very clear message, and I think, you know, unfortunately, over the years, a lot of non-disabled actors have been rewarded for playing disability, and I think that needs to change. And honestly, I mean, you asked if this character is close to Troy. In ways, yes, but I saw Troy in 2 productions of Deaf West before I ever cast him. The most different roles, you know, the first thing I saw him in was an Edward Albee play, and he was playing this very like neurotic, intellectual, kind of buttoned up professor. And I thought, this guy is such an amazing actor. I mean, I'm not sure he's Frank, but and when Troy walked into his audition, he was so phenomenal, and he had transformed into this guy, and he lived in Gloucester and hung out with the local fishermen and was super method and getting drunk, you know, on Saturday night. The most dangerous bar where I'm like, get out of there, you're gonna get your ass kicked. But the thing that was, you know, there's this idea that like somehow that Troy was not playing an incredible character, and there was so much work that went in as an actor, and so
He just walked in off the street, sort of.
that just like somehow, and Marlee, you've said it before about Marlee's Oscar when she was 21 was dismissed, like, well, it's not really acting if she's deaf playing deaf. And it's like, well, Leonardo DiCaprio is not really acting because he's hearing playing hearing. Like, what are you talking about?
Some even accused me of having gotten the pity vote.
Right.
So
anyway, all I'm saying is that I think these are phenomenal actors. Troy, Daniel, and Marlee are phenomenal actors. They are not deaf actors, they are actors. And I'm so honored to have worked with them, and I've had an amazing cast. But I hope that artists, you know, directors, writers, start writing these roles and feeling brave about going, hey, maybe this role wasn't, maybe the story's not about deafness, but I just make this character deaf, and they're a doctor, they're a lawyer, you know, and it's because audiences really respond. It's fresh and it's exciting to see on screen, and ASL is the most cinematic language out there. So Anyway, this is a very long-winded say. I feel very soapboxy about this because
This is why I asked the question, because I know you care a lot.
I do care a lot, and I've taken a big journey with this film. I've had an incredible education, so I'm still learning. I don't fault anyone because we're all learning, and I think the majority of hearing people don't have a friendship with a deaf person, so they're not a part of the culture, aware of the culture. So I hope this movie starts to open people's eyes to it's a very universal story, and the comments I've heard are like, wow, that dad feels just as out of line and embarrassing as my dad. And I'm like, yeah, great. I want this family to just feel like every, a normal out there family that anyone could relate to.
The time is now to collaborate.
Amen.
Collaborate and write wonderful movies. Think of deaf actors. Think of using real deaf actors, not hearing actors putting on a costume as if they are putting it on and taking it off at the end of the day. There's plenty of actors out there who can do phenomenal jobs, awesome jobs. And the bottom line is, do not be afraid to work with us. And don't be afraid to ask questions. And I know many of you are our peers here, and we are experienced the same way you're experienced working with Hollywood. So all we want to do is to be able to work as much as you do. And we're very proud of this film, and I hope that tonight makes you think that we are here. And hopefully we can do it one way or another in the future.
Thank you.
I'd like to chime in as well. I'd like to say the two people that made the biggest difference and who were the game changers are our director, Sean and Marlee, because they fought for authenticity. Without them, Daniel and I would not be here.
Definitely, he's right.
So thank you so much. And obviously, they have real balls. Oh, I mean, ovaries to have made this happen. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for letting us end on that note, Troy. And really taking to heart what Marlee said. We all have our marching orders. We can all do something in our lives. Doesn't matter if you have green light power or not. These are small steps. So please be empowered and enjoy yourselves tonight. And thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. Congratulations. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, interpreters, as well. Good job.